Some are delicacy, and some are highly poisonous, while some you can grow in your own backyard. I'm James Coover, and I'm the crop production agent for the K-State Research and Extension Wildcat District. Today, we're going to be talking about growing mushrooms. Today we're going to be talking about shiitake and oyster mushrooms. They're grown in two different ways, and we're going to cover both of those ways today. First, we're going to be talking about the shiitake mushroom. Shiitake is a name that actually comes from Japan, and it means the mushroom of oak, which is the main species that we can grow mushrooms, or the shiitake mushroom, in. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what species we can grow these shiitakes in, and then we're going to talk a little bit about log inoculations. Most shiitakes and the more advanced forms of mushrooms are almost always grown in logs in some fashion. And so the species of log that we have around here that we can grow shiitakes in include oak, sugar maple, cottonwood, and even some of the hickories like pecan as well. Some of the species around here that do not grow well in, we have ash, hackberry, and also some of the more ones with chemicals in it like walnut and cedar. And so really to begin, you actually need to find the right tree. What size of log to cut? Well, honestly, that just kind of depends on what is manageable. The time of year, usually you want to cut logs for mushroom production somewhere in the winter time frame, somewhere between November to March. So at this point, we're getting kind of late in the year because all the sugars are coming out in developing leaves, but you want the sugars inside the logs to begin with. To start off any hobby, of course, you're going to need the right stuff. Growing mushrooms is actually fairly cheap and easy. However, you will need some things to get started. And so let's cover here what all that we've got to do this. You're going to need a corded drill. I would highly suggest a corded one because you're going to be using this a lot. You'll need some drill bits of a couple of different sizes depending on how you're going to be doing your inoculation. You'll also need some wax for sealing later on. And this is actually a special sealing wax. You could probably use any kind of wax, but this wax melts at a lower temperature. It's just a little bit easier to work with. You'll need a portable burner, an old pot that you don't like very much that you can melt the wax in. You really can't wash them out, so use a pot you don't like very much. Or you can, stovetop, a little cotton dowel, or you can use a little paintbrush, whatever you have that will work. Here are the wooden dowels, and these have been inoculated with the mushroom mycelium. And so they're kind of white and fuzzy, and they're ready to be put in the logs. This right here is if you're going to be using sawdust to inoculate your logs, and it's just a little plug that you put the inoculum in, and you inject it into your log. This is a rubber mallet for when you're going to be putting the dowels into your log. And if you're going to be using sawdust, you need a bag of inoculated sawdust. And so some of the stuff that you will probably need to order online, of course, the inoculated sawdust or the wooden dowels. You might went ahead and get some sealing wax while you're at it. And of course, this is kind of a specialized piece of equipment as well. And so, and really besides that, a lot of this other stuff you probably already have. First, you need to drill some holes into your log. And really, to drill these holes, what size drill bit you need depends on which one you're going to do. A larger drill bit for the sawdust, a smaller drill bit for the wooden dowels here. But as for the hole placement, it doesn't matter which type that you use because the hole placement is the same. You want to have a log, and the holes will be about 6 to 10 inches apart along your log for each row, and then for each column, maybe around 2.5 inches from each row and along the log. You kind of want to do a diamond pattern, so that way it's in all the way around the log as well. To inoculate your logs, first, ideally, you actually want to use some plastic gloves, but I don't have any. So We're going to start off by doing some sawdust. Doing the sawdust is actually kind of the cheaper method, and you can do a whole lot of logs with just one bag of sawdust. So take your specialized little plug here. You just pack the sawdust into the end of the tip. Get a hole and just push it in there. You kind of want the sawdust to be just a little bit recessed from the log skin. And so and there you are. And so as you can kind of see here when we're doing the wooden dowels, is that I kind of made a diamond pattern as you're going along your log here and all the way along the log. So that way they're just not all in the same spot or in the same row. And so to put the wooden dowels, it's a very quick process. You just put them into the hole and hammer them in. And just like you did with the sawdust, you kind of want them even with the skin. And so once you have your log completely filled out, like one of these, here this is kind of a red oak log here. As you can see, I've got all the dowels all over it. These dowels are kind of sticking out a little bit. Ideally, I should have pushed these down closer against the skin. But once you're done, you want to take some wax here. When waxing your logs, just take a little bit of wax on your dowel or your brush or whatever you have, and just dab it on. And like I was saying before, you can use pretty much any kind of wax as long as it doesn't have some sort of chemical in it, but this stuff is pretty easy to work with. And so for every plug that you've got, cover it up and seal it. And the purpose to wax these is to A, keep the wild funguses out, to keep the moisture in. After you do the outside of the log or the dowels, you can also wax the ends as well. Ideally, you want to put your log somewhere on the north side of a house or a barn, garage, wherever they can be out of the sunlight in a place of higher humidity. Here we're on the north side of my parents' barn and underneath the drip line. How to place your logs, really they can go in any way. A lot of places they'll take their logs and they'll kind of put it in sort of a rick. You want some air gaps between your logs, so that way get some air circulating through there, and they just kind of stack them up. Of course, you could also, if you have fewer logs, you can just stack them up against a house or a building. However it works, just have a little space between them, and that will work. As for the moisture in the log, is kind of important. You need to regulate the moisture to make sure that the fungus inside of it is spreading. Ideally, you want between 35 to 45% moisture inside of the log. Of course, that's very difficult to tell. So really, pretty much every time that you're watering your garden, you're watering your lawn, ideally you want to water your logs as well. Besides that, some other tricks that you can use, you can actually soak your logs. So if you have a basin of some sort, you can just dip your logs in for an hour or so and to kind of get that moisture inside of the log. Another thing you can do is once you have them all stacked up, you can actually cover them with a sheet. And the purpose of doing that is to build up the moisture percentage inside of that. And so that way they don't dry out as easily. Of course, if they dry out completely, it tends to kill the fungus, and then you won't see anything. How long these will have to sit before they start to fruit, that's of course the most exciting part. I would say it depends on the size of the log. If you have a pretty skinny one like this oak that we just did today, this will probably take around 6 months, and so this could be fruiting in the fall if we're lucky. Most of them will take around a year, and so next spring. And some, if you get a very big log, it'll take even longer than that. However, they will produce for a number of years. And so oaks, is a nice heavy log, and so they could produce for 4 or 5 years. And the bigger the log, the longer they produce. And so it's something you kind of want to do every year, every other year, so that way you get a continuous flush as time goes on. Once you have your logs completed, one thing you can actually do is to put a nameplate on the end of each log to kind of help you remember what year they came from. These were done last year, so I have last year's nameplate on them. And, some of them will be different types as well. This is actually an ash. I don't know if they're going to grow anything, but we'll see what happens. And so, once they start to fruit, of course, eat whatever grows. You want to make sure that what you're growing is, in fact, a shiitake mushroom. If you'll notice, the shiitake mushroom, it is a little bit of a larger mushroom than some of the wild ones we'll see, but also to make sure to look under the underside that it has gills. Also look on the internet and make sure that it looks like a shiitake mushroom. And so it kind of has that speckledy top to it, and it's a fleshy mushroom rather than a thin piece of paper mushroom that some of the wild ones are. And so just to make sure that it looks very similar to what it should be, and there's a pretty safe bet that if it looks a lot like a shiitake mushroom and it's gilled on the bottom and everything's good, that you're ready to go. Next up, we're going to be talking about oyster mushrooms. And oyster mushrooms are very easy to grow. To grow them, all we are really going to need is a plastic bag, some sort of substrate. The most common is straw, which is what we're going to be using today. But some other things you can use are really anything that's high in carbon. So coffee grounds, sawdust. You can actually inoculate them in logs like we did with the shiitakes as well, but you have a much larger variety that you can use. You could probably use the ash and the hackberry and the stuff that we talked about before that wouldn't work for shiitakes. The only other thing that you'll need, of course, is the inoculated sawdust. The first thing you're going to need to do is to boil your substrate. And the reason for this is to kill all the wild funguses that could be inside of it. My barrel burner here, where I can boil an entire straw bale at once. Of course, most people don't have this possibility, or if you just have a house inside town. So you can actually really do this anywhere in a much smaller batch. Just do it on your stovetop or anything where a large pot that you can boil your substrate in. And to do your oyster mushrooms, first you'll need a bag of some sort. This is a rather large bag, and so you can actually use a bag that's much smaller than this. Ideally speaking, while you're ordering your substrate, go ahead and order bags that are made for mushrooms. And we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but some bags are easier to work with. And so just take your substrate here. Just like the shiitakes, it's better to use gloves if you have some. Stuff a little bit down in there. Take some of your substrate. For a bag of this size, you'll want about maybe a cup and a half, 2 cups your oyster sawdust. Just sprinkle some in there and kind of make a layered cake of sawdust, straw, or whatever it is that you have. And so once you have this all completely layered together, fill up the bag as much as you can, and then seal it off. And then you just want to tape down the flaps here so that way it doesn't unravel. But you do need a little bit of oxygen. And so a specialized mushroom bag will often not have a little air patch in it to allow a little bit of air in, but not so much air that it's going to allow some of the wild funguses and the dust in. And so for a bag that doesn't have that air patch, what you can do is you can poke little holes into it so just a little bit of air can get in. Once you have all your straw inside of your bag, you might notice a little bit of moisture building up inside of it. That's pretty normal because you want your substrate just barely damp. Not so much that you can squeeze water out of it, but just enough so they have some moisture for the fungus to grow in. You can add some more water into your bag as time goes on if need be, but often not. There's usually enough moisture in there, you can just let it go. And so once you have it all sealed up, and you got your little bit of air is coming in, and everything will be ready. Where you want to put these is honestly anywhere inside of your house. Maybe get a little bit of sunlight, but not so much that it's going to heat up the bag. Because they need temperatures around 70 to 80 degrees, basically household temperatures. When it is ready, this will be completely covered in white, and it'll be like a white fuzz all the way through it, and literally covering the bag. If you start to see some other colors, let's say the greens and the yellows, that's probably some wild mold that got in there, and basically it means that it's ruined your bag. And so you want it completely covered in white, and it almost looks like it's trying to escape, because it is. You want a little bit of you see little tiny mushrooms basically just trying to pop through the various, like say the air patch or the little holes that you poked in your bag. That means you know it's ready. It's trying to fruit. And so you want to take wherever it is trying to come out, you want to maybe cut out the air patch, or basically wherever you see the little mushroom trying to poke through, cut a little slit in your bag. And also you can cut some more slits where you're not seeing that yet. Because what it is a response to oxygen. When oxygen gets into the bag, it tries to fruit to that spot, basically like it's coming out of the ground. And so for a bag of this size, I'll probably cut maybe 20 slits into it, which is kind of a 1 inch by 1 inch cross. In smaller bags, maybe you want to do 10 or a dozen or so. And so once you cut those slits into it, just kind of set it, leave it alone. Try not to push it against something on the sides, so that way the mushrooms have areas to grow. And then once that's done, it'll take around 3 days, and the oyster mushrooms will be poking out through it. Oyster mushrooms, once again, you want to make sure that the mushroom that you grew looks like the kind of mushroom that you want to eat. And so oyster mushrooms, they can come in a variety of different colors. Most of them are sort of a gray, a white, and there's a variance in temperature ranges that they prefer as well. And so the strain you get will kind of depend on what you end up with. And actually, the form looks a little bit less pronounced than a shiitake does. It's a little bit unformed, kind of a mushroom. And so just check on the internet, make sure that the kind of mushroom that's growing is looking like what it's supposed to look like. Thank you for joining me today. I know this is a quick demonstration, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to grow mushrooms in your own house, in your own backyard. There are a number of publications out there to help you along the way. There are publications from Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma for growing mushrooms. And if you ever need some help along the way, you can also give me a call. My cell phone number is 620-778-1037. Now, if you don't mind, I have my basket here. It's a beautiful spring day, so the morels are growing. Thank you.